Revival of Handicraft by William Morris, originally published in the Fortnightly Review, November 1888. For some time past, there has been a good deal of interest shown in what is called in our modern slang, art workmanship, and quite recently there has been a growing feeling that this art workmanship, to be of any value, must have some of the workman's individuality imparted to it beside whatever of art it may have got from the design of the artist who has planned, but not executed, the work. This feeling has gone so far that there is growing up a fashion for demanding handmade goods, even when they are not ornamented in any way, as, for instance, woolen and linen cloth spun by hand and woven without power, hand-knitted hosiery, and the like. Nay, it is not uncommon to hear regrets for the hand labor in the fields, now fast disappearing from even backward districts of civilized countries. The scythe, the sickle, and even the flail are lamented over, and many are looking with drooping spirits to the time when the hand plow will be as completely extinct as the quern, and the rattle of the steam engine will take the place of the whistle of the curly-headed plowboy through all the length and breadth of the land. People interested, or who suppose that they are interested, in the details of the arts of life feel a desire to revert to methods of handicraft for production in general, and it may therefore be worth considering how far this is a mere reactionary sentiment incapable of realization, and how far it may foreshadow a real coming change in our habits of life as irresistible as the former change which has produced the system of machine production, the system against which revolt is now attempted. In this paper, I propose to confine the aforesaid consideration as much as I can to the effect of machinery versus handicraft upon the arts, using that latter word as widely as possible, so as to include all products of labor which have any claims to be considered beautiful. I say as far as possible, for as all roads lead to Rome, so the life, habits, and aspirations of all groups and classes of the community are founded on the economical conditions under which the mass of the people live, and it is impossible to exclude socio-political questions from the consideration of aesthetics. Also, although I must avow myself a share in the above-mentioned reactionary regrets, I must at the outset disclaim the mere aesthetic point of view, which looks upon the plowman and his bullocks and his plow, the reaper, his work, his wife, and his dinner, as so many elements which compose a pretty tapestry hanging, fit to adorn the study of a contemplative person of cultivation, but which it is not worth while differentiating from each other, except in so far as they are related to the beauty and interest of the picture. On the contrary, what I wish for is that the reaper and his wife should have themselves a due share in all the fullness of life, and I can, without any great effort, perceive the justice of their forcing me to bear part of the burden of its deficiencies, so that we may together be forced to attempt to remedy them, and have no heavy burden to carry between us. To return to our aesthetics, though a certain part of the cultivated classes of today regret the disappearance of handicraft from production, they are quite vague as to how and why it is disappearing, and as to how and why it should or may reappear. For to begin with, the general public is grossly ignorant of all the methods and processes of manufacture. This is, of course, one result of the machine system we are considering. Almost all goods are made apart from the life of those who use them. We are not responsible for them. Our will has no part in their production, except so far as we form part of the market on which they can be forced for the profit of the capitalist, whose money is employed in producing them. The market assumes that certain wares are wanted. It produces such wares indeed, but their kind and quality are only adapted to the needs of the public in a very rough fashion, because the public needs are subordinated to the interest of the capitalist masters of the market, and they can force the public to put up with the less desirable article if they choose, as they generally do. The result is that in this direction our boasted individuality is a sham, and persons who wish for anything that deviates ever so little from the beaten path have either to wear away their lives in a wearisome and mostly futile contest with a stupendous organization which disregards their wishes, or to allow those wishes to be crushed out for the sake of a quiet life. Let us take a few trivial but undeniable examples. You want a hat, say, like that you wore last year. You go to the hatter's, and find you cannot get it there, and you have no resource but in submission. Money by itself won't buy you the hat you want. It will cost you 3 months' hard labor and 20 pounds to have an inch added to the brim of your wide-awake. For you will have to get hold of a small capitalist, of whom but few are left, and by a series of intrigues and resolute actions which would make material for a 3-volume novel, get him to allow you to turn one of his hands into a handicraftsman for the occasion. And a very poor handicraftsman he will be when all is said. Again, I carry a walking stick, and like all sensible persons, like it to have a good heavy end that will swing out well before me. A year or two ago, it became the fashion to pare away all walking sticks to the shape of attenuated carrots, and I really believe I shortened my life in my attempts at getting a reasonable staff of the kind I was used to, so difficult it was. Again, you want a piece of furniture, which the trade, mark the word, trade, not craft, turns out blotched all over with idiotic sham ornament. You wish to dispense with this degradation and propose it to your upholsterer, who grudgingly assents to it. And you find that you have to pay the price of 2 pieces of furniture for the privilege of indulging your whim of leaving out the trade finish. I decline to call it ornament on the one you have got made for you. And this is because it has been made by handicraft instead of machinery. For most people, therefore, there is a prohibitive price put upon the acquirement or the knowledge of methods and processes. We do not know how a piece of goods is made, what the difficulties are that beset its manufacture, what it ought to look like, feel like, smell like, or what it ought to cost apart from the profit of the middleman. We have lost the art of marketing, and with it the due sympathy with the life of the workshop, which would, if it existed, be such a wholesome check on the humbug of party politics. It is a natural consequence of this ignorance of the methods of making wares that even those who are in revolt against the tyranny of the excess of division of labor in the occupations of life, and who wish to recur more or less to handicraft, should also be ignorant of what that life of handicraft was when all wares were made by handicraft. If their revolt is to carry any hope with it, it is necessary that they should know something of this. I must assume that many or perhaps most of my readers are not acquainted with socialist literature, and that few of them have read the very admirable account of the different epochs of production given in Karl Marx's great work entitled Capital. I must ask to be excused, therefore, for stating very briefly what, chiefly owing to Marx, has become a commonplace of socialism, but is not generally known outside it. There have been 3 great epochs of production since the beginning of the Middle Ages. During the first, or medieval period, all production was individualistic in method. For though the workmen were combined into great associations for production and the organization of labor, they were so associated as citizens, not as mere workmen. There was little or no division of labor, and what machinery was used was simply of the nature of a multiplied tool, a help to the workman's hand labor, and not a supplanter of it. The workman worked for himself and not for any capitalistic employer, and he was accordingly master of his work and his time. This was the period of pure handicraft. When in the latter half of the 16th century the capitalist employer and the so-called free workman began to appear, the workmen were collected into workshops, the old tool machines were improved, and at last a new invention, the division of labor, found its way into the workshops. The division of labor went on growing throughout the 17th century and was perfected in the 18th, when the unit of labor became a group and not a single man. Or in other words, the workman became a mere part of a machine, composed sometimes wholly of human beings and sometimes of human beings plus labor-saving machines, which toward the end of this period were being copiously invented. The fly shuttle may be taken for an example of these. The latter half of the 18th century saw the beginning of the last epoch of production that the world has known, that of the automatic machine, which supersedes hand labor, and turns the workman, who was once a handicraftsman helped by tools, and next a part of the machine, into a tender of machines. As far as we can see, the revolution in this direction as to kind is complete, though as to degree, as pointed out by Mr. David A. Wells last year, 1887, the tendency is towards the displacement of ever more and more muscular, labor, as Mr. Wells calls it. This is very briefly the history of the evolution of industry during the last 500 years, and the question now comes, are we justified in wishing that handicraft may in its turn supplant machinery? Or it would perhaps be better to put the question in another way. Will the period of machinery evolve itself into a fresh period of machinery more independent of human labor than anything we can conceive of now? Or will it develop its contradictory in the shape of a new and improved period of production by handicraft? The second form of the question is the preferable one, because it helps us to give a reasonable answer to what people who have any interest in external beauty will certainly ask. Is the change from handicraft to machinery good or bad? And the answer to that question is, to my mind, that, as my friend Belfort Bax has put it, statistically it is bad, dynamically it is good. As a condition of life, production by machinery is altogether an evil. As an instrument for forcing on us better conditions of life, it has been, and for some time yet will be, indispensable. Having thus tried to clear myself of mere reactionary pessimism, let me attempt to show why statistically handicraft is to my mind desirable, and its destruction a degradation of life. Well, first I shall not shrink from saying bluntly that production by machinery necessarily results in utilitarian ugliness in everything which the labor of man deals with, and that this is a serious evil and a degradation of human life. So clearly is this the fact that though few people will venture to deny the latter part of the proposition, yet in their hearts the greater part of cultivated civilized persons do not regard it as an evil, because their degradation has already gone so far that they cannot, in what concerns the sense of seeing, discriminate between beauty and ugliness. Their languid assent to the desirableness of beauty is with them only a convention, a superstitious survival from the times when beauty was a necessity to all men. The first part of the proposition, that machine industry produces ugliness, I cannot argue with these persons, because they neither know nor care for the difference between beauty and ugliness. And with those who do understand what beauty means, I need not argue it, as they are but too familiar with the fact that the produce of all modern industrialism is ugly, and that wherever anything which is old disappears, its place is taken by something inferior to it in beauty, and that even out in the very fields and open country. The art of making beautifully all kinds of ordinary things, carts, gates, fences, boats, bowls, and so forth, let alone houses and public buildings, unconsciously and without effort, has gone. When anything has to be renewed among these simple things, the only question asked is how little it can be done for, so as to tide us over our responsibility and shift its mending on to the next generation. It may be said, and indeed I have heard it said, that since there is some beauty still left in the world, and some people who admire it, there is a certain gain in the acknowledged eclecticism of the present day, since the ugliness, which is so common, affords a contrast whereby beauty, which is so rare, may be appreciated. This I suspect to be only another form of the maxim which is the sheet anchor of the laziest and most cowardly group of our cultivated classes, that it is good for the many to suffer for the few. But if anyone puts forward in good faith the fear that we may be too happy in the possession of pleasant surroundings, so that we shall not be able to enjoy them, I must answer that this seems to me a very remote terror. Even when the tide at last turns in the direction of sweeping away modern squalor and vulgarity, we shall have, I doubt, many generations of effort in perfecting the transformation. And when it is at last complete, there will be first the triumph of our success to exalt us, and next the history of the long wade through the putrid sea of ugliness, which we shall have at last escaped from. But furthermore, the proper answer to this objection lies deeper than this. It is to my mind that very consciousness of the production of beauty for beauty's sake which we want to avoid. It is just what is apt to produce affectation and effeminacy amongst the artists and their following. In the great times of art, conscious effort was used to produce great works for the glory of the city, the triumph of the church, the exaltation of the citizens, the quickening of the devotion of the faithful. Even in the higher art, the record of history, the instruction of men alive and to live hereafter was the aim rather than beauty, and the lesser art was unconscious and spontaneous, and did not in any way interfere with the rougher business of life, while it enabled men in general to understand and sympathize with the nobler forms of art. But unconscious as these producers of ordinary beauty may be, they will not and cannot fail to receive pleasure from the exercise of their work under these conditions, and this above all things is that which influences me most in my hope for the recovery of handicraft. I have said it often enough, but I must say it once again, since it is so much a part of my case for handicraft, that so long as man allows his daily work to be mere unrelieved drudgery, he will seek happiness in vain. I say further that the worst tyrants of the days of violence were but feeble tormentors compared with those captains of industry who have taken the pleasure of work away from the workmen. Furthermore, I feel absolutely certain that handicraft, joined to certain other conditions, of which more presently, would produce the beauty and the pleasure in work above mentioned. And if that be so, and this double pleasure of lovely surroundings and happy work could take the place of the double torment of squalid surroundings and wretched drudgery, have we not good reason for wishing, if it might be, that handicraft should once more step into the place of machine production? I am not blind to the tremendous change which this revolution would mean. The maxim of modern civilization to a well-to-do man is, avoid taking trouble. Get as many of the functions of your life as you can perform by others for you. Vicarious life is the watchword of our civilization, and we well-to-do and cultivated people live smoothly enough while it lasts. But, in the first place, how about the vicars, who do more for us than the singing of Mass for our behoof for a scanty stipend? Will they go on with it forever? For indeed, the shuffling off of responsibilities from one to the other has to stop at last, and somebody has to bear the burden in the end. But let that pass, since I am not writing politics, and let us consider another aspect of the matter. What wretched, lopsided creatures we are being made by the excess of the division of labor in the occupations of life. What on earth are we going to do with our time when we have brought the art of vicarious life to perfection, having first complicated the question by the ceaseless creation of artificial wants, which we refuse to supply for ourselves? Are all of us, we of the great middle class, I mean, going to turn philosophers, poets, essayists, men of genius, in a word, when we have come to look down on the ordinary functions of life with the same kind of contempt wherewith persons of good breeding look down upon a good dinner, eating it sedulously, however? I shudder when I think of how we shall bore each other when we have reached that perfection. Nay, I think we have already got, in all branches of culture, rather more geniuses that we can comfortably bear, and that we lack, so to say, audiences rather than preachers. I must ask pardon of my readers, but our case is at once so grievous and so absurd that one can scarcely help laughing out of bitterness of soul. In the very midst of our pessimism, we are boastful of our wisdom, yet we are helpless in the face of the necessities we have created, and which, in spite of our anxiety about art, are at present driving us into luxury unredeemed by beauty on the one hand, and squalor, unrelieved by incident or romance on the other, and will one day drive us into mere ruin. Yes, we do sorely need a system of production which will give us beautiful surroundings and pleasant occupation, and which will tend to make us good human animals, able to do something for ourselves, so that we may be generally intelligent instead of dividing ourselves into dull drudges or duller pleasure-seekers according to our class, on the one hand, or hapless, pessimistic intellectual personages and pretenders to that dignity on the other. We do most certainly need happiness in our daily work, content in our daily rest, and all this cannot be if we hand over the whole responsibility of the details of our daily life to machines and their drivers. We are right to long for intelligent handicraft to come back to the world which it once made tolerable amidst war and turmoil and uncertainty of life, and which it should, one would think, make happy now we have grown so peaceful, so considerate of each other's temporal welfare. Then comes the question, how can the change be made? And here at once we are met by the difficulty that the sickness and death of handicraft is, it seems, a natural expression of the tendency of the age. We willed the end, and therefore the means also. Since the last days of the Middle Ages, the creation of an intellectual aristocracy has been, so to say, the spiritual purpose of civilization, side by side with its material purpose of supplanting the aristocracy of status by the aristocracy of wealth. Part of the price it has had to pay for its success in that purpose, and some would say it is comparatively an insignificant part, is that this new aristocracy of intellect has been compelled to forego the lively interest in the beauty and romance of life, which was once the portion of every artificer at least, if not of every workman, and to live surrounded by an ugly vulgarity which the world amidst all its changes has not known till modern times. It is not strange that until recently it has not been conscious of this degradation, but it may seem strange to many that it has now grown partially conscious of it. It is common now to hear people say of such and such a piece of country or suburb, "Ah, it was so beautiful a year or so ago, but it has been quite spoilt by the building. 40 years back the building would have been looked on as a vast improvement. Now we have grown conscious of the hideousness we are creating, and we go on creating it. We see the price we have paid for our aristocracy of intellect, and even that aristocracy itself is more than half regretful of the bargain, and would be glad if it could keep the gain and not pay the full price for it. Hence not only the empty grumbling about the continuous march of machinery over dying handicraft, but also various elegant little schemes for trying to withdraw ourselves, some of us, from the consequences in this direction of our being superior persons, none of which can have more than a temporary and very limited success. The great wave of commercial necessity will sweep away all these well-meant attempts to stem it, and think little of what it has done, or whither it is going. Yet after all, even these feeble manifestations of discontent with the tyranny of commerce are tokens of a revolutionary epoch, and to me it is inconceivable that machine production will develop into mere infinity of machinery, or life wholly lapse into a disregard of life as it passes. It is true indeed that powerful as the cultivated middle class is, it has not the power of recreating the beauty and romance of life, but that will be the work of the new society which the blind progress of commercialism will create, nay, is creating. The cultivated middle class is a class of slaveholders, and its power of living according to its choice is limited by the necessity of finding constant livelihood and employment for the slaves who keep it alive. It is only a society of equals which can choose the life it will live, which can choose to forego gross luxury and base utilitarianism in return for the unwearying pleasure of tasting the fullness of life. It is my firm belief that we shall in the end realize the society of equals, and also that when it is realized, it will not endure a vicarious life by means of machinery, that it will in short be the master of its machinery and not the servant, as our age is. Meantime, since we shall have to go through a long series of social and political events before we shall be free to choose how we shall live, we should now welcome even the feeble protest which is now being made against the vulgarization of all life, first because it is one token amongst others of the sickness of modern civilization, and next because it may help to keep alive memories of the past which are necessary elements of the life of the future, and methods of work which no society could afford to lose. In short, it may be said that the movement towards the revival of handicraft is contemptible on the surface in face of the gigantic fabric of commercialism, yet, taken in conjunction with the general movement towards freedom of life for all, on which we are now surely embraced, as a protest against intellectual tyranny and a token of the change which is transforming civilization into socialism, it is both noteworthy and encouraging. Note from the reader. The Revival of Handicraft was originally published in 1888 and is in the public domain in my country. A PDF version of this essay has been published by the California College of Arts Furniture Program. To my best knowledge, this version was originally published in Glenn Adamson's The Craft Reader. This version includes historical notes on other lectures given by William Morris, as well as suggested reading, likely compiled by Adamson. Here are the footnotes and further reading suggestions. 1. William Morris, The Beauty of Life. Lecture first delivered 1880, subsequently published in Hopes and Fears for Art, 1882. 2. William Morris, How We Live and How We Might Live, lecture first delivered 1884, first published in Commonweal, 1887, and subsequently in Signs of Change, 1888. 3. William Morris, Art and Socialism, lecture first delivered 1884. 4. William Morris, The Aims of Art, lecture first delivered 1886, subsequently published in Signs of Change, 1888. Further reading: Caroline R. Scott, William Morris, Decoration and Materialism, published in Marxism and the History of Art from William Morris to the New Left, edited by Andrew Hemingway, London, Pluto Press, 2006. Charles Harvey and John Press, William Morris, Design and Enterprise in Victorian Britain, Manchester University Press, 1991. Fiona McCarthy, William Morris, A Life for Our Time, London, Faber and Faber, 1994. William Morris by Himself, Designs and Writings, edited by Gillian Naylor, London, MacDonald Orbis, 1988. E. P. Thompson, William Morris, Romantic to Revolutionary, London, Lawrence and Wishart, 1955.